The bad news is that there are already significant changes to the global climate system. And it's shown very clearly in this graph called the climate spiral. Many of you will have seen it. That is actually moving when you look at it on the internet. And it shows very clearly how the temperature has increased since 1850 and that we are now very close to the 1.5 degree limit and even the 2.0 degree limit. And the good news is that there is actually a very strong political commitment for a sustainable development. And this was shown last year in the agreements on the Paris Agreement on Climate Change and the Agenda 2030, which includes the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And these two frameworks are mutually reinforcing. The Paris Agreement taps into and will be the main vehicle to reach Goal 13 in Agenda 2030. And when you look at the two frameworks together, the essence is that we need to move towards a zero carbon future, leaving no one behind. And to get there, we need to work with adaptation to manage the risks, with mitigation to decrease emissions. And I also want to point out that there are strong interlinkages in practice between adaptation and mitigation and regular development. So there are great opportunities for co-benefits. And what we do in the area of climate change. Climate change is not a sector, but all sectors are impacted by climate change, and there are opportunities for climate action within all sectors. And having said that, there is still a focus of climate change work in a number of sectors, and agriculture and food security is one of the largest ones. But we also have climate change objectives in initiatives working within the education sector, health sector, and democracy and human rights, etc. And Sida is one of the largest bilateral climate change donors per capita. And what makes us different from other donors, if you look at the global picture, is that we have more of a focus on adaptation than others. And it was became very clear last year in the OECD report on climate finance that there is a huge adaptation is hugely underfunded, and Sweden is one of the donors that actually puts an emphasis on adaptation. So that is something that can be noted. Yeah. And this nice picture, it's a bit, it's very nice. So it almost looks as if it's somebody fiddled with the figures, but it's not. I've done it myself, so I know it's for real. You can see how the y-axis is Swedish kronor, and you can see how the climate change finance has increased from with about tenfold from 2008 to 2015. And the green is funds that go to mitigation activities. The red is funds that go to adaptation, and the blue is a big chunk that goes to contributions that have both adaptation and mitigation objectives. And these are in all, these are both global, regional, and bilateral contributions. And when it comes to bilateral, our largest climate change recipient countries are Mozambique is at the top with like 200 million SEK something in 2015. And then Tanzania, Zambia, Kenya, Bolivia, they are at the top of the bilateral countries. And then about looking specifically at food security and agriculture, we do acknowledge that there are strong links between improved livelihood, sustainable management of natural resources, and resilience to climate change. And Sida has a strong history of working in supporting sustainable livelihoods. It's interesting to see, because now much of the work that has been done for many, many years is now the approaches are promoted by policy experts as ways to reach resilience to climate change. So that tells us that we have been doing these things right, and that we should also continue working on it, and perhaps even more strongly. Another point is that we do see. We do see opportunities in climate smart agriculture, potential win-win-win in the same logic as adaptation, emission, and development. And the full portfolio, last year it was 757 million SEK within the sectors agriculture, forestry, fisheries, and rural development. And the focus areas within food security and agriculture is on these areas: farming as a business, and that's an interesting area. It has been a strong focus within Sida's agricultural work the last 15 to 20 years, and it's about moving from subsistence farming to commercial farming, and that is an area that we now see as it's been successful, but there are good opportunities to integrate climate change work in that much better than we have done so far. Other areas are women's strengthened role in agriculture, productivity increase, land rights, and then we have a large portfolio of contributions that have a specific climate change focus. One is our big support to FAO, which is softly earmarked towards sustainable agriculture. Another is support to CGIAR, which, for example, has resulted in the development of scuba rice, the new rice variety that is tolerant to floods. Another type of support is the one we have to IUCN Mangroves for the Future, which is a support to local communities in coastal areas for improved livelihoods and sustainable use of and management of mangrove resources. And then other types of support are the support to framework supports we have to Swedish civil society organizations, of which I think a number are in this room, like We Effect and the Swedish Society for Nature Conservation and more, that work closely with partner organizations in local partner organizations in the countries on improved livelihoods. And we also work with the private sector. These are just examples. But then I'd also like to give a view of the wider picture, because we do a lot of work in other areas that complements the work in food and food security and agriculture. And these are significant contributions, for example, within the areas of trade and market development, where we, for example, support low-income countries in the international trade negotiations. And we also have a large portfolio of improved management of natural resources and improved access to water and sanitation, which actually has a large impact on nutrition, food security and nutrition. And then we have the humanitarian aid, which has a very strong, obviously a very important role to play when it comes to zero hunger in a changing climate. Sida is the 5th biggest bilateral donor globally. And there is an interesting shift now, finally, where actors, including Sida, are promoting a shift from food handouts to cash transfers in order to not undermine local producers and local food markets, so that these can survive in times of crisis. And I'd also like to mention social protection, which is key to protect the most vulnerable to climate change, has been pointed out, for example, by the World Bank in its excellent Shockwaves report. And it's also heavily emphasized by the FAO as a road towards food security. And Sida is currently increasing its engagement in social protection, and we have support at different levels, some of them very large, like the new support we have to Tanzania, but also to a number of other countries. And let's see. Finally, I'd like to mention it's a difficult area. In particular, the divide between humanitarian aid and crisis and long-term development that often falls between the chairs among policymakers and donors in particular. And but there are interesting examples, and one is the African Risk Capacity, which is a regional African insurance system against extreme weather events, where weather data is objective weather data is connected to insurance, so countries automatically get payouts depending on the weather event. And this is something that we have supported the development of and are following with interest. So this is the last one. I'd like to get back to the leaving no one behind in a zero carbon future, which I think this seminar today is very much about. And it's not an easy task. It's a huge challenge, and we need to step up the efforts. And 3 points to highlight is that there is need for a strong political leadership in the concerned countries for food security and climate change adaptation. There is a need for us to work better and more systematically with gender equality, as that is a game changer. And finally, we should continue to work with adaptation and the most vulnerable in focus, because we can make a big difference there, including mobilization of other finance. This is not mobilization of other finance is discussed a lot when it comes to mitigation, but here public actors like bilateral donors have the possibility to make a big difference in leveraging finance, for example, towards adaptation in agriculture.